Hey everyone, Tactics here, and with Dragonflight finally in the hands of some players on Alpha, I'm planning on bringing back my weekly roundups where I can just give you guys all a quick overview of what's new every week on the Alpha for WoW's newest expansion and beta when that inevitably comes out as well. This is going to be relatively brief, like I said, so I'll be posting links that are more in-depth on all the topics that I just kind of go over quickly in the description if you want to learn a little bit more about specific things. But that lets me put these videos out and let them be fairly concise, which I think is good. This episode in particular, though, is going to be a little bit longer because I do have 2 weeks of Alpha to cover. I'll go through initially the everything we got in the initial build, and then of course everything that we got just in the newest build that happened yesterday. I'll put timestamps though in the description if you want to skip through all that stuff as well. Background footage might be a little bit scuffed currently because I don't personally have Alpha access, but I'll make do until I do. Anyways, enough talking. Let's get into the very first Alpha build that we got last week. One of the biggest features people are excited about is talents, of course, and in this first Alpha build we had the 5 previously released classes for talents. So it's Druid, Death Knight, Priest, Hunter, and Rogue, as well as Evoker. So Evoker was fully released alongside Dragthyr, right? Only Dragthyr can be Evokers. The Devastation and Preservation specs are like a mid-range caster, 1 DPS spec, 1 healer spec. Really good mobility, tons of customization. They come with some interesting spells. They have a raid buff and Blessing of the Bronze, which is a movement related ability CDR by 15%. Seems kind of weak, to be honest with you, but they do have a raid buff in that. In terms of potentially interesting raid utility or dungeon utility abilities they have is one called Time Spiral, which lets all your party or raid members use a specific movement related ability, again the same one tied to the raid buff, regardless of the CD once in the next 10 seconds. So some nice mobility there for your entire party or raid. Another one is Zephyr, which is a 25% AoE damage reduction and 30% move speed buff for 8 seconds only on your party. So even if you're in a raid, it only affects your party. They also have an ability called Fly With Me, where they run and they pick up a party member and they drop them off at a location with themselves, and you can talent to have a big max health shield on that as well on a 1-minute CD. And then their healer external is actually pretty interesting. It's called Time Dilation, and it's a stagger button. Like, it starts at 50% damage stagger over 8 seconds, and you can talent it to be as much as 70% stagger over 14 seconds on a 1-minute CD. So very interesting there. Post links down below for more stuff on all their other abilities as well. Only one zone was available for testing. That's the Azure Span. It's not the starting zone of the continent. I believe it's a middle zone, but it is one of the biggest zones, if not the biggest zones ever made. It looks beautiful, big Grizzly Hill vibes, and it's really fun to experiment with the new dragon riding system, which of course is also on the Alpha now, and that looks very promising. It's insanely cool looking. I would love to see this kind of turned on for the rest of the world, because of course I believe only Evokers and their racial can do that kind of dragon flying stuff in the outdoor world that's not in Dragonflight. Those dragon riding mounts are disabled in the rest of the world. But it would be cool to eventually have that turned on and eventually have maybe other mounts slowly transitioned into the system. I think that would be great, but it looks really cool at first glance. I'm excited to get my hands on that. There's also like time trials throughout the world that you can do, and the dragons themselves are extremely customizable. So really happy with how that's turning out. The other big revamp in this expansion is the profession revamp. So blacksmithing and alchemy are currently testable on the Alpha, and there's a few pretty significant changes. So of course, with all those like specialization trees, potion, files, which are the new flasks. Blacksmithing can spec into like armors, weapons, and then even within that you can spec into like, I want to make axes, I want to make swords, or I want to make boots, I want to make helmets, that kind of thing. Very interesting. Something we also did learn previously is that this crafted gear is able to be equivalent to mythic gear if you use the right materials. These materials are likely going to be bind on pickup, and you can acquire them from doing the content at a high level. So high Mythic Plus, high rated PvP, Mythic rating, and you'll be able to bring these bind on pickup materials using the new work order system to a crafter that can make you that gear. So you yourself don't need to be a crafter and also collect the bind on pickup items. You can bring those BOP materials to a crafter that can make your stuff. So that's pretty interesting, and we'll have to see how that plays out. Speaking of Mythic rating and that kind of stuff, the new raid is Vault of the Incarnates. Not going to go too in depth on that right now. Probably do a whole video on that raid once we know a little bit more. But currently, what we know, 8 boss raid, some normal mechanics in the dungeon journal, but looks pretty cool. I'm excited to see how that shapes up for heroic and mythic. And once raid testing gets out, of course, I'm excited to get in there and do that. We also did see tier sets are returning, and we saw some of the transmog for the tier sets. Some hits, some misses, so should check those out for sure to see what your class is getting in terms of transmog options for the new tier, but the tier bonuses will be returning as well. We just don't know what those are yet. Lastly, for the initial wave of the alpha stuff, there was a bunch of dev interviews that went out. There's lots of quickfire, smaller bits of info from these. I'm going to try and touch on just the most notable points. So for Mythic Plus stuff, Temple of the Jade Serpent and Court of Stars are planned to be a part of the first season of Dragonflight dungeons. Tyrannical and Fortified will be making a return. And they are planning to do a seasonal affix, so they did say they want it to be a little bit more simple because dungeons are going to be constantly rotating out, and they don't want that added complexity on top of dungeons that you have to learn every season, which I can partially agree with. On a similar note, the Great Vault and the Creation Catalyst are going to be making a return as well, and they are thinking about some other deterministic way to kind of progress towards your gearing goals. Maybe some Season 4 related stuff hinted at, but we'll have to see how that system actually works out in Season 4. In terms of looting, group loot for raids specifically is going to be making a return, essentially allowing organized groups to use master loot with this system. It's not going to be a thing in dungeons. They say they want to keep dungeons as full personal loot, but at least for organized raids, you'll be able to master loot if you so choose. With the profession revamp, they're also planning to give us a little bit of help in terms of bag space. So there's going to be an entirely new profession bag slot on your character. It's going to be pretty large, so you can hold all that stuff, and especially those new bind on pickup materials, give you some space for that. Archaeology is not reworked as of yet. I'm sure some people have seen, but they did mention they do plan on revisiting that potentially with a new framework. And the other big thing here is that they are saying that they're planning to do smaller, more frequent content patches, which I am all for. You know, content more often is definitely a thing that WoW has needed for a little while now, so hopefully they're able to execute on that. But that is what was up initially on the PTR, or the alpha rather, in week 1, and we got a new build yesterday. So alpha build week 2, what did we get? So first and foremost, we got the Shaman talents. All 3 specs for Shaman got their talent tree added into the game, and there was actually adjustments for all of the 6 previous classes that already had their talents on there. And these aren't just like node changes. There were some that had pretty significant pathing changes as well. So it's really good to see Blizzard iterating on those talents on a week-to-week basis and getting feedback. So excited to see that. The new zone available is the Forbidden Reach, which is the Evoker starting zone. Meanwhile, they've disabled the zone, the Azure Span from the previous week, so everyone's focused on testing the Forbidden Reach. There are 2 new dungeons on the alpha rather as well. Neltheris, which is kind of like this fire-themed, like molten dungeon, looks pretty interesting, and the reworked Alderman, which we did hear we were getting back when they announced Dragonflight, which is a more linear kind of 5-boss dungeon. I don't really have an opinion on either of these yet. Gonna have to wait and see when their Mythic Plus is out for testing and see how those dungeons actually scale and those abilities. But I will definitely be putting out guide videos for all the new dungeons, so keep an eye out for those. Alongside these new dungeons, we also had another profession available for testing with cooking. Nothing too crazy coming for that one. They haven't really done too much with the secondary professions yet. They've mostly focused on primary professions, but we'll have to see how cooking ends up shaping up. Likely not as significant changes as something like blacksmithing and alchemy that were in the original build. There we have it, episode 1 of the Dragonflight weekly roundup covering the first 2 weeks of the alpha done. Like I mentioned, the rest of these videos will be significantly shorter because I'll only be covering 1 week and not the initial build of the alpha. So hopefully you guys found these video helpful, useful. Hopefully if you have questions or anything like that, or you want to learn more, my links help, or you can of course comment down below. I'll do my best to answer. If you enjoyed the video though, make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with everything Dragonflight related, and I'll see you in the next video.